Hey FTMSweethearts, this is Sara and it's week 59. This week we're talking about tea expectations, both ours and our partners. So I really wanted to involve Seth in, not necessarily the video, but I wanted to ask him some questions and just find out where he was coming from in terms of what his expectations were. I did get a little bit out of him, but I think he's kind of uncomfortable just being reminded that he's trans. Even when I listen to the videos in the same room as him, he tells me to turn it down or whatever because he doesn't like hearing things that remind him that he's trans. So he did give me a little bit. Basically, his expectations were that he would grow muscle, his fat would redistribute, facial hair, growth downstairs, some emotional changes, I think, and most of that rang true for him. His fat did redistribute. His voice dropped within the first, I'd say, month or month and a half. We were actually long distance at that time, and I remember talking to him one week, and he was kind of going through that second puberty, awkward teenage boy, squeaky voice stage, which was really cute, and it had kind of dropped a little bit, but it hadn't dropped all the way. And then the next time I spoke with him, maybe a week later, his voice had completely dropped. It was so much lower, and I didn't even know who I was talking to. We didn't really expect it to drop that fast, but it did, and he was really happy with that because he was kind of self-conscious about his voice, even though it wasn't super girly or high to begin with. So yeah, that was probably the first change. And then he expected to have some growth downstairs, but I don't think he expected it to happen as fast as it did. It was one of the first changes that we noticed as well. Most of the changes occurred within the first couple months, I'd say, and then since then it's kind of been much more of a slower, gradual process. We haven't really noticed much growth lately, which is disappointing for him, but what can you do? There's not really anything that he can do to help. He might be getting testosterone gel or DHT gel to put on that now that he's had his hysterectomy, and hopefully that'll help a little bit. But we haven't really noticed significant growth since the first few months of his transition. His facial hair, he really wanted sideburns of all things, which is funny to me because I think that most guys would want a beard or a mustache, but he really wanted sideburns. So, you know, whatever floats your boat. They came in probably, it took them a really long time to come in. They were really patchy for a long time. They probably didn't come in until about the 1.5 to 2 year mark. He's now about 2.5 years on T. So they did take a long time to come in. But they are the length and the fullness that he wants now, so that's good. He still doesn't have a mustache, which I find is weird. I don't know why it hasn't come in, but I don't really mind because I find mustaches kind of creepy, depending on the person, but usually creepy. His beard has taken a really long time to grow in as well. He can now grow a full goatee and a semi-fullish beard. It's not really patchy, but it's just kind of not as full as it probably will be eventually. So he's mostly been shaving that and just kind of keeping a goatee or chin strap, which I friggin' hate, but whatever. Whatever he wants to do, it's his face, I guess. What else? Muscle gains. He's gained a lot of muscle since being on T. He works out pretty intensely. He goes to the gym about 4 to 5 times a week, and he lifts pretty heavy. He found that, how do I explain this? Basically, before T, he worked out probably about the same amount, maybe a little bit less, and he was pretty athletic, had a pretty athletic build then, like when I first met him. But it took him a really long time to get to that point, and he wasn't even super muscular or anything. He was just kind of an athletic build. Now he has pretty decent muscle gains. He's still not as big as he wants to be, which is ridiculous to me because I think he's a perfect size, and I'm not a huge fan of like giant muscles, so I'm hoping he's not going to be like Arnold Schwarzenegger or anything, because that would freak me out. But he just finds that now it's, I guess, easier for him to put on muscle, but it's still not as easy as he had thought it would be. He has noticed like significant gains since being on T, though. And fat redistribution, there's been a lot of changes in that aspect. He has noticed that he's lost some baby fat in his cheeks, and even bone redistribution to an extent. He was kind of at the age when he started T that he wouldn't really grow much, or he didn't really think that his bones would shift as much as they did, but I found that they did a lot. He actually grew 3/4 of an inch, which isn't too much because he was 5'6" pre-transition, so he's almost 5'7" now, and that's still, to him, too short. I think he's perfect height, personally, because I'm 5'3.5", so it works. He's not, like, extremely way taller than me or anything awkward where I have to, like, basically bend backwards just to hug or kiss him. So he did grow a little bit, and I also noticed that his cheekbones changed. That probably is a combination of muscle and fat, fat and bone, rather. But he used to have really prominent high cheekbones that he inherited from his grandma, and now he doesn't really have them anymore. So I think that has to do with bones shifting as well, or whatever. I don't know what happens really to bones necessarily, but I think that's something T has affected it somehow. And his hips have definitely become less wide. They were a lot wider pre-T, and I think that has to do with fat and like bones as well. I think his bones have shifted a little bit, and we actually have heard from other trans guys that we know that that can happen, that your, like, basically your pelvis or your hip bones can shift. So he's pretty lucky because he passes really well in that sense. A lot of guys still have kind of wide hips or hips that give them away, and he doesn't really anymore. What else? I think that I covered all of his expectations in terms of his physical changes. Emotional changes, he didn't really talk too much about it. I think that he generally expected everything that he experienced. The one thing that he wasn't expecting was he, just after starting T, would have these terrible dreams where he would be raping women, sometimes me, sometimes just random people that he doesn't know or has never seen before, which is really terrifying. Of course, I would probably be terrified even if I was the person that was raping the other person. That would just throw me right off, and it did for him. It really, really scared him, and he basically was afraid that he was turning into a monster, but they definitely died off. He does not have dreams like that anymore, and we also have friends who have experienced the same thing, so that must be some kind of chemical reaction in the brain that triggers that power or control feeling in the male brain. I'm not really sure, but there are other guys who have experienced it, so that kind of was comforting to know that he wasn't the only one for both of us, because it was scary to me as well. I don't think he expected to not be able to cry, and building on what Emily said, I do agree with a lot of what she said. I think that a lot of it is the way that society has instilled these ideas into everyone's minds that men are supposed to be a certain way. They're supposed to be tough and in control and powerful, and they're not supposed to have emotions because it shows weakness. I do believe that is a key factor to an extent. However, I know that Seth can't cry in certain circumstances. He can cry if anything happens to any animal ever, even if it's like a squirrel, he can bawl his face off. Some movies he'll cry, but if it's anything that's related to him personally, I find that that's when he has a difficult time crying. For example, he just had his hysterectomy, and in the the recovery room, he was talking about how he was in so much pain that he just wished he could cry. He wanted to cry, and he felt like he could cry, but he couldn't. Like, the tears just wouldn't come out. So I think that there are definitely instances for certain people where it is a physical reaction to tea or whatever. So he wasn't really expecting that, and sometimes it's frustrating for him that he can't cry. And I also find it kind of frustrating sometimes, for example, when we're in a fight, like a really intense fight, which we haven't been in a while, but previously when we would get into arguments a lot, and he wouldn't cry, even if it was like a really big fight or argument, it kind of made me feel like he didn't care, or it wasn't important enough to cry over. And now I realize that it's not really something he can control, but it's hard to remember that in the heat of the moment. So yeah, I think that's all I had from him in regards to his expectations. In regards to his fears, he basically just said he was afraid that people wouldn't accept him, especially his mom, because she is so religious. He was afraid that she would basically kick him out and pull all of his school funding, which she didn't. She wasn't really fond of the idea of him being a lesbian before, so that's why he was so worried that when he came out as trans that she would not approve, but everything went generally okay. She is pretty supportive, but she does say some offensive things unintentionally. I've tried to send her links to various YouTube videos, blogs, different kinds of information about what it's like to be trans. I don't think that she's read it, but I really wish she would, and I don't really have any sympathy for her anymore because it's been 2.5 years and she's a grown woman, so I think it's kind of her responsibility now to take the reins and kind of educate herself. But overall, she is supportive. She helped pay for his top surgery. She was there with him for his hysterectomy. Like, she is very supportive, and she does help him with his, she has his tea on her benefits, so he gets a discount because of her benefits, or he gets part of it covered. So she's pretty good for that. And the rest of his family is generally accepting, except for some assholes, but he doesn't really care about them anyway. So fears in regards to us, he was afraid that I wouldn't be attracted to him anymore, and I think he still has some fears about that because he is still going to change quite a bit. He was afraid that we wouldn't make it, which is a common fear, I think, amongst partners in both trans and not, because it's common that people don't survive transition, and I can totally understand why, because it's not easy. It's a really difficult thing to go through together on many different levels, not only because there can be moodiness and times where you don't understand each other, to changes that you didn't expect and that you are no longer attracted to, and that's not really something that someone should be judged for, because I don't think that these kind of relationships are for everyone. I definitely respect that some people aren't cut out or aren't prepared to deal with some of the issues that you deal with when you're in a relationship with someone who's trans. So he was afraid of that. There was something else too. Well, he was afraid of losing his singing voice, which he did, unfortunately. He used to have a really awesome singing voice, and he used to play guitar and cover songs. He actually had a YouTube channel, but he deleted it because he's a jackass, and I'll never forgive him for that. I used to watch them all the time when we were long distance, just to kind of comfort myself and feel like we were closer, but he deleted it because he's a big jackass. So I still think that he can sing a little bit. It's not the same, but he thinks that he's terrible now, so he just doesn't sing or play guitar ever, which sucks. I think that's pretty much it for his part of it. In terms of my expectations, I pretty much expected all of the same things as Seth did, because he informed me of a lot of it, and I did have friends previous to meeting him that were trans as well, and they basically explained a lot to me. The only thing that I was unsure of was timelines, but you can't really be sure about that with anybody because it's different from person to person. So I was just basically unsure as to when things would happen, how much things would change, like things like that. One of my biggest fears was him becoming less emotional and less passionate, which I found has kind of rang true to an extent. He's not as emotional as he was before, in the sense that he doesn't really talk about his feelings a lot anymore. He's a lot more in his head than he used to be. However, he is happier, but he is less outwardly emotional. He's more in his head, like I said, and just kind of thinks things through instead of talking to me about them. He was never really a romantic person, in the sense that he's not the type to plan surprises, because he sucks at them and always ends up telling me that there's a surprise, or making me breakfast in bed or something like that. That's not really his style. So that hasn't really changed, because it's still the same. He's still not romantic, but he's not really emotional either, to an extent. Like, he is and he isn't. And passion, he's not as passionate as he was when he first started tea, or even pre-tea. He was much more passionate than he is now. I think a lot of that has to do with struggles that we've had in our sex life, just getting used to his sex drive and my sex drive, and all the changes that we've experienced and all the fighting we went through. And then for the past, I'd say, almost a year, he's been experiencing pretty bad pains in his abdomen region, which we're pretty sure were due to his uterus being exposed to higher amounts of tea than it was supposed to. But he's just had a hysterectomy, so we're hoping that that will change, because he was experiencing those pains after sex. Orgasm would bring that on, so we're hoping that once he's fully recovered, that those will no longer be an issue, and that we can kind of get back to focusing on getting our sex life back to where it used to be. I guess I was afraid as well that we wouldn't make it, because, like I said, I know that it's difficult. I didn't really know how difficult it would be until I was in a relationship with someone who was trans. We've gone through a lot of shit together. We went through about, I'd say, a period of a year after he started tea, or a little bit less than that, where we would fight all the time. We had, like, terrible fights. We almost didn't make it a lot of times. We thought, like, this is it. We can't be together anymore. I can't be with you. I can't deal with this. Or times when I would say something that was offensive unintentionally, and then he would be so dysphoric and uncomfortable that he would basically be like, we can't have sex anymore. I can't have sex with you, or whatever else. We just got into, we had a rough go of it for about 8 months to a year. So I definitely know how hard it can be now, and I'm proud to say that we're still together today. It's still difficult, but we've gotten past the hardest part, I think, or at least all the arguing and fighting, which is good, because that's not fun for anybody. What else was I afraid of? I guess that's really it. That's all I can really think of. Oh, I was kind of afraid as well that he would have so much confidence and realize that I'm a total plain Jane and kind of boring and not that attractive, and then leave me for someone else. And I kind of realized that I was a big douche now for that. So, yeah, I'm kind of silly. But I thought that, you know, he would just become more confident and think that he could find better, or that he wouldn't need me anymore, which I don't necessarily want him to need me, but at the same time it felt kind of good to be needed while he was going through his transition in the beginning. And now I'm kind of over that. I mean, I like to feel important and needed to an extent, but I know that he does need me. He just doesn't voice it in the same way, because he is more confident, comfortable, and happy with himself. So I'm glad for that. That's pretty much it. My best advice to anyone in this position is to not overthink things, because you will think of every possible outcome and every negative thing that can possibly go wrong. Like, you won't be attracted to that person anymore, or they won't need you anymore, they will find someone else, they might be attracted to the same gender, like there's some theories around that. And you just end up overthinking and basically overanalyzing everything and worrying to death about things. And I was guilty of it too, to an extent, but I think that's the biggest issue. And I think you just need to kind of go with the flow and realize that chances are you're going to fall in love with that person all over again for who they are becoming. Along, like, every step of the way, you're going to fall in love with things that you didn't think that you would fall in love with. Or the changes that you thought were going to be so drastic don't seem as drastic now until you really look back. If you compare the two, obviously it's drastic change, but you think it's going to be so much more of a big deal than it really is. I think obviously there are some instances, there's some people that aren't ready for those changes and can't deal with the changes, and that's fine. But I think for the most part it's in our heads, and we get way over our heads with overthinking everything. And I think it's really important also to have open communication lines with your partner. It can be really difficult to bring up your emotions and your fears and things that bother you or make you uncomfortable, because your partner is extremely vulnerable. They're going through a huge change in their life. They're not super confident, most likely, and they're afraid to lose you. So bringing up any fears or insecurities or things that you are afraid you might not like, that's really hard because you don't want to hurt that person's feelings. But it's important to find a way that you can talk about those things with your partner in a way that's not going to cause a huge problem or make them feel like shit about themselves, basically. So yeah, I think that's all I really have to say for this week. If you have any questions, just ask me below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And I'll see you guys next week. Thanks, guys.